It's this coming in union with nature and with our own nature and with all of the things that are, that are sometimes lacking in our modern Western rat race, fast-paced, disconnected lifestyles.
Like, it's a larger question how this stigma has evolved in general, but it seems the stigma itself is simply wrong. It's not actually the case that most people who use drugs are very problematic. Most people who use drugs are just fine. And a very small subsample of people who use drugs have many problems.
Psychedelics. We know they exist, but do we really know what they are? Join us in this mini documentary as we follow a microdoser, a recreational user of psychedelics, a professor and researcher on the topic, a creative director of a psychedelic retreat here in the Netherlands, and a store owner here in Amsterdam.
I am Mace. I do a dual degree, so I study illustration and I study arts and culture studies at the university. I started microdosing because a friend recommended it to me. She was very enthusiastic about it, which made me just very interested in it. And her brother does it as well, so I had lots of positive experiences around me. That's why I wanted to try it out as well. I microdose every 2 to 3 days. Typically, a dose is 1/10 of a normal dose of what you would need to actually experience a trip. And it is best to take it on an empty stomach, that then you would feel the full effects the fastest. When I microdose, it's a very subtle feeling. So overall, I'd say I'd feel more confident, and as someone who does 2 degrees, it can be quite hectic and it can be just a lot on my mind. So it is nice to microdose in that case, because it really it sorts you out, like your thoughts a little bit. It makes it easier to focus on what needs to be done instead of just being anxious about everything. To someone who might not be as informed about microdosing, I'd say to them that it's really, I get that it can be quite daunting to them, as it is associated with like the bigger, taking it to experience like a trip kind of effect. I use microdosing for managing my thoughts mostly, but it also really helps with creativity as well. I feel like when I'm stressed, I cannot draw anything. It's very hard for me to be creative, and microdosing really helps with that, because it sorts out your thoughts, and by that it makes you more creative and makes it easier to create.
Yeah, so my name is Jurjan Zelmans. I'm a postdoctoral researcher at the Department of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry at the VU University in Amsterdam. I study there child mental health mainly, and how that develops over time and how it's influenced by different factors. But I'm also getting involved in psychedelics research. So I've started to organize and coordinate a course on psychedelics in the honors program of the VU University. So there are several types of psychedelics which are usually described. So the most known psychedelics are what we now call classical psychedelics, and those are basically the psychedelics that work on the serotonergic system on a very specific receptor. And these are psychedelics such as LSD, which is a synthetic psychedelic, so made in a laboratory, but also psychedelics such as psilocybin, which is the active ingredient in magic mushrooms, so which is a natural occurring psychedelic. And these classical psychedelics all seem to work very similarly on a neurobiological level, and they seem to have very similar effects in people. And then what people now sometimes refer to as non-classical psychedelics are other substances that have psychoactive action, and those include substances like MDMA, for example, so which is the active ingredient in ecstasy, which isn't a psychedelic completely similarly in the way it works in the brain, but especially at higher dosages it seems to have somewhat similar effects. But also people have argued that substances like cannabis also have psychedelic effects at higher levels. So it's not really a clear-cut definition anymore. The research on psychedelics has seen a major increase over the past 20 years or so. I guess you could say there's sort of two main areas where that started, or at least restarted again. So there's large studies on the use of MDMA as a treatment option for post-traumatic stress disorder, I think one of the reasons why that got started up again is because psychiatry has this issue of we can treat many people with the psychiatric illnesses they have and the mental problems they have, but there's still a substantial group of people which we don't seem able to help sufficiently, or where it takes a long time before any treatment has effect. So there's a real need to develop new therapies, new treatments, new ways of helping people with these problems. And MDMA seems to be one way that really allows for that. We don't really know exactly yet how psychedelics help people with mental illnesses, but there are some theories on this. So one of the main ideas is the following. One issue in particularly depression disorder is that people seem to be stuck in these rigid patterns of thought. So they seem to be rethinking the same things over and over again, and usually these are very negative things. And even though they get feedback that tells them that actually things are not that bad or things are going well at some points in their lives, they still have the feeling that everything is going wrong, and they seem to interpret it in a very negative way. And of course, this doesn't define depression in its totality, it's just a particular example of how it may work. The idea when you take psychedelics is that it sort of resets this state of mind. So rather than being stuck in these sort of grooves of thought, which you don't seem to be able to get out of, psychedelics seem to smooth over the surface a little bit, allowing you to have new ideas again and to reevaluate the ideas that you already had. So this is one of the suggestions of how it may work at sort of a psychological level. On a more biological level, there's some evidence, at least in vitro studies, so this is where you just take cells and put them in dishes and put substances with them and investigate what happens. And there it's now being nicely shown that many psychedelics seems to enhance neuroplasticity, so how nerve cells make new connections with one another. So this may be a neurobiological mechanism on how it allows people to heal. But I've also already talked about MDMA for PTSD, and here too there are some ideas of what the mechanism may be. So one idea here is that people who have experienced trauma, they relive these experiences often. And when they relive these experiences, they have very negative connotations with them. So they feel very badly, and sometimes so badly that they freeze or they don't know what to do anymore, and it really interferes with their lives. The idea with MDMA is that when you take MDMA, what happens is that you feel very, very pleasant. And it's nearly impossible to really feel something that is unpleasant. So the idea then is that if you can consider your trauma and think about your trauma in a state where you feel very pleasant, then you may reconsolidate the memory so you can restore it, as it were, without all these negative affects with them. So in that way, once you're sober again and you're just in your normal state, when your memory brings you back to the trauma, not so many negative emotions may be attached to them. There's such a large stigma about these drugs, whereas now we are investigating them as very positive things. So one of the reasons why this stigma may exist, so this idea about negative things, is because there's this larger stigma around drugs in general, which suggests that people who use drugs are very problematic and have bad lives and do not know how to perform in society. And like, it's a larger question how this stigma has evolved in general, but it seems the stigma itself is simply wrong. It's not actually the case that most people who use drugs are very problematic. Most people who use drugs are just fine, and a very small subsample of people who use drugs have many problems. And then the question is, do they have these problems because they use drugs, or do they just have many problems, and does this interact with their drug use, you could say? Yeah, to using drugs, there are also always some risks. And with psychedelics, we know that these are fairly small, especially with the classical psychedelics. So psychedelics like LSD and psilocybin, mescaline and DMT. Of these, we really know that the acute effects or the acute risks are quite small. So what can happen is that people, for example, have very unpleasant experiences where they're very frightened, or they can be quite confused. But it seems to mainly occur when people are not well prepared or are in an environment which they're not comfortable with. People have this idea about psychedelics, especially for example LSD, that people take it and then lose their mind and think they can fly and jump out of windows and things. And we actually know that these reports are simply either not true, or we actually have some stories on how these stories may have developed. But these are not things that happen generally at all, and it is doubtful whether they happen at all when people take psychedelics.
Okay, we sell different kind of truffles here, magic truffles, psychedelic ones, okay? They have the same psilocybin as the mushrooms. Like imagine we can have the 5-6 different kinds over here, okay? Over here the Mexicana is just for laughing, like euphoric, happier, okay? Then you got the Atlantis, that's to make you laugh a lot. You see a little bit of colors, okay? Then the down you go, then the hallucination a little bit starts. You start to see the hallucination, a little bit moving, colors, this kind of stuff. Then it's the Dragon Dynamite. So that's quite similar to, you may say, you have the stronger visuals, like more imaginary, more deeper. Like you go in your thinking, a deep dive, you may say. If you can control your mind, that's amazing. And then come the higher ones. In this one actually, it's a roller coaster. It keep on changing, like one time you're laughing, then you start to see the colors, then you are a bit of hallucination, like deep diving, thinking, this kind of stuff, and suddenly it stops. Then again it starts. So it comes in waves. So these are the different type of mushrooms that we are selling. Yeah, the truffles actually. The mushrooms are not allowed to sell, so you can only sell the truffles. The most basic ones, you may say that the people who use the mushrooms, and if you compare this with the truffles are very safe. With the mushroom, if you mix them with the different drugs or in the normal environment as well, they could be too strong for the people. Because Amsterdam is an excited city, people comes here for like, a bit excited. So for them, it's a really good thing in my opinion. It doesn't, I don't want to say that word, it doesn't fucks you up. You stay like in a proper proportion, and you can have some good fun as well. In your limits. Any drugs? Ex-colleague. So this is that's what they do actually. Most fun the people wise, and what I recommend to the people as well, like Atlantis and Mushrocks. These ones like totally in a limit, nothing too crazy, and you can have some good time. No, I don't think so. Like the people are not like, this never goes like in any kind of addiction or something like that. It never happened in my sense of knowledge, you may say. I work here 5 years, I think so. Like I had like only 2-3 clients who comes like maybe 2-3 months, after 2-3 months. So it never happened like anybody having addiction on truffles or something like that. A bad story is that like when people mix them with different kind of drugs, even if you see on the boxes, it says that you never mix them with any other drugs, especially with alcohol or anything else. But sometimes if they don't listen to us, it could have a bad trip. Anything could lead to a bad trip. So in these ones, maybe like you try the lightest one, you try to mix them with alcohol. Sometimes actually it could be a very good thing. It could be 50-50 chance. But you could lead to a bad trip as well. There was a guy, he was like just literally jumping in on the tables of a restaurant. That's what they told me for one time. And a good story is like billions of them. People come, they say they were on the beach, they were seeing angels on the water and this kind of stuff. So there was like, and like some of them, like if you go to a Van Gogh museums and this kind of stuff, they see the pictures are talking and moving. Of course it's imaginary, but these are like, they had a very good time, like 3-4 hours, this kind of trips. I would recommend always like, you should buy the psychedelics when your mind is ready. If your mind is not ready, somebody's pushing you, stay away from them. Because mushrooms, they are any psychedelic drugs, it's all in the mind. If your mind is not ready, you should never do that. And if your mind is ready, why not? Then, of course, if you can be creative, they could be really helpful to you in that sense as well. And yeah, that's my strongly advice. You should only do when your mind is ready. And if you want to do. If you don't want to do, you just wanna like with the friends you are there, but you are not into these things, then avoid them.
So I started psychedelics about half a year ago. I started it out of sheer curiosity actually, because I was with a friend and we both wanted to try psychedelics for a very long time already, but we didn't have the opportunity yet. And then we were together, we said, okay, let's just do it. And I did it because I have a very big curiosity to, let's say, extended states of consciousness, and that's exactly what psychedelics gives you. So that's why I did that. I would say it's sort of life-changing, because you experience things during the psychedelic trip which you never experienced before, which is more real than a dream, let's say, more real even than waking life in some sense. And you can encounter beings or encounter symbols which have great meaning, and you carry them for the rest of your life. An example of a life-changing experience, which was a few months ago. I was tripping really good, and I closed my eyes, because I like to close my eyes during the trip, because that's where the magic happens. Also outside, but for me the best trip is when you close your eyes. So, and then I encountered this being, which was sort of a nymph or a mythical feminine creature, which was very enchanting and very impressive. And she didn't say anything, but just her way of being really inspired me, and I carry that with me still, and I try to convey that in my art. I try to use it not too often, because you start to compare things like in real life, and as soon as you start to compare psychedelics with a previous trip, for instance, it starts to lose its magic a little bit, because you start, last time was a bit better, or this time is better than last time, and you start to compare, and it starts to lose the magical element of it. You start seeing patterns everywhere. So if you open your eyes, you look into the forest, for instance, you'll see all the geometrical patterns in the trees, for instance. You start seeing figures in the clouds. You start your face starts becoming orange, for instance, and very and very symmetrical, and all that sort of stuff. And when you close your eyes, you start seeing all these visions, these beautiful colors, these patterns, beings, symbols, one big mix of meaning, I would say. And lots of times, sometimes it goes together with fear. So first of all, in the beginning, you're nauseous, because psychedelics are disgusting to take in. After that, the bliss comes, and you can also have, which I had also, is a ego elimination. So instead of a normal state consciousness in which you identify yourself with certain things, you stop identifying yourself with those, and you just are being. You just are an observer in your own mind, or in a mind, let's say, and you start observing yourself. The greatest pro is you can have a trip to heaven, and the greatest con is you can have a trip to hell, I would say. But all in all, I don't think there's that. Also, you have to be really careful, because if you have a background in schizophrenia, you shouldn't take it, because you will have schizophrenia if you take psychedelics, and you have a sensitivity towards schizophrenia. So don't do that. Those are the negative sides. But if you don't, I wouldn't say there's many negative sides, because even if you encounter something during a psychedelic trip which is really frightening and really terrible, still you will carry that the rest of your life as something which you will never forget, and it probably will be maybe a warning to you, which will help you better your life. So either way, if it's good or bad, your trip, I would still say in the end it's good for you.
So we facilitate psychedelic retreats in the Netherlands, And basically, we're a team made out of people from all over the world. A lot of us are based in Berlin. Some of us are based in all over Europe, some coming from Israel, some from the US. And we come from a very kind of broad spectrum of modalities. So we cover stuff in the realms of therapy, in the realms of medical background, the realms of creative types of therapy, like dance work, like art therapy, sound, people coming from the background of sound. And we work pretty much as a collective. So we have different formats actually that we work with, but our kind of like stereotypical retreat is that we have groups of up to 15 people max, and we do around 4 to 6 days retreats, and then within it there's 1 or 2 sessions which are with psilocybin. So the group comes together, and a lot of our background in some of our crew is from also shamanic practices and from learning from a more plant medicine based traditional approach. So in a way, the way that we work with the medicines is kind of where the contemporary Western therapy, psychedelic therapy, comes and meets the more indigenous traditional type of background. Yeah, so basically we have these 1 to 2 sessions per retreat, and the reason that we have all these other days is that there's a big focus around preparation and integration, which we see as way more important than just the experience itself. The experience itself is very important, but it's the whole package that creates the holistic experience that actually gives the potential for change and for growth. Yeah, so like for example, in our application processing, when we're taking people on retreats, then one of the questions that we ask out of the many is do you have any mental issues? Do you have anything that you've been diagnosed by a therapist or by a psychiatrist or in your family? So there's things like schizophrenia or bipolar or deeper levels of depression or PTSD as well, that are not necessarily always the right timing to do psychedelics, and they could be riskier for some people. There's different researches, different people have different opinions about this. I have multiple opinions. There's the work that I do, which is as safe as possible, but then there's my opinions in the background, which are see things in a bit more of a broad way. And so yeah, there's risk to trigger things as well, to open up. It's a deep opening of your psyche, of your heart, of your mind, and especially in a culture that we're used to keeping everything closed and locked, and so sometimes if you get it could be suddenly like a big opening. Then if there isn't the right container and the right integration process and the right support system for that, then it could go wrong as well and be counterproductive mainly.
So that brings us to the end of this mini documentary. And that's all from us for now. But please get in touch via social media, Facebook, Instagram, Spotify, YouTube, and let us know. Have you gained a new perspective? Has your perspective changed?